The day started like any other, but it wouldn't end that way. I was driving down I-95 with my friend Carolyn Russo, the sun beating down on us, the radio droning in the background. It was just another summer day. My sister, Janice, was in another car with our mom, a few miles ahead of us. We were all heading to the beach, excited for a day of sun and laughter. Then, out of nowhere, Janice's car pulled up beside us. She was honking her horn, waving frantically, and screaming for me to turn on the news. I glanced over, confusion clouding my mind, what was going on. I fumbled with the radio, trying to find a news station. The first thing I heard was a DJ's voice, calm and almost casual, saying, "The singer of this song is dead today." I froze. The words didn't register at first. Then Elvis's voice filled the car, singing one of his classic hits. My heart dropped. It was like the world stopped spinning. I couldn't even react. I was just in shock, I remember thinking. My hands trembled, and I could feel the tears welling up. Carolyn and I pulled over to the side of the road. Janice and Mom's car screeched to a stop next to us. We all got out, standing there in a daze as cars whizzed by. Janice wrapped her arms around me, and we hugged, hugging tight as if we could somehow hold back the flood of emotions. My mom, usually so strong, was crying too. We stood there, a circle of grief, as the news sank in. Elvis Presley was gone. The king of rock and roll, the man who had brought so much joy and energy into our lives, was dead. It was like losing a piece of our own family. We were just a small group of fans, but we felt the loss deeply. The world would never be the same without him. As we stood there, hugging and crying, I couldn't help but think about all the memories. The first time I heard his music, the way it made me feel alive, the concerts I had watched, the way he made everyone feel special. It was more than just the music. It was the way he connected with people, the way he made us feel like we were part of something bigger. We eventually got back into our cars, but the drive to the beach was silent and heavy. The beach, usually a place of laughter and fun, felt different. The sun didn't seem as bright, and the waves didn't sound as joyful. We spent the day in a daze, each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to process the news. Elvis Presley was more than just a singer. He was a symbol of a generation, a beacon of hope and rebellion. His music had touched so many lives, including mine, and now he was gone. The air around us was thick with the weight of that loss, and we knew that things would never be the same again. I bought a hog from Mr. Presley and gave him a check. He let 2 other young men see the check and copy my signature. These men used the copied signature to forge checks in my name. They even paid Mr. Presley about $15 for letting them do it. When asked about it, Mr. Presley told the whole truth right away. One of the men who forged the checks is in a tough spot. He has a wife and a small child, and they are in financial distress. They need him very badly. He's not a bad man. He's never been in trouble before. The money was repaid to me, and this man realizes the mistake he made. I believe he has been punished enough. He's a great young man, and if given a chance, I am confident he will become a good and useful citizen. For these reasons, I respectfully ask that you grant him a pardon. I remember when Elvis was just a kid in Tupelo. My health wasn't the best, but I always tried to be there for him. There were times when he'd come over to our house, and we'd sit and talk. He was just learning to sing back then, and he'd often hum tunes he heard on the radio. Elvis was a very common kid, wearing simple clothes like most of us. He and his family lived in a small house on the edge of town. Despite their modest means, they always had a warm home. Elvis would often play with his friends in the woods, and we'd see him running around with a big smile on his face. His mom, Gladys, was always hugging him and telling him how much she loved him. She did all the work to keep their home running, and Elvis would help out any way he could. He was a hard worker, even at a young age. Sometimes he'd go to the store and buy groceries for his family, and he'd always carry the bags with pride. Elvis had a big dream. He wanted to make it on his own, and he often talked about how he would do it. He'd say, "There has to be more to life than this." It broke my heart to see him so determined, but also so young and innocent. When they moved to Memphis, things changed for Elvis. He started working at Crown Electric and met a lot of new people. He was a bit nervous at first, but he made friends quickly. One of his best friends was a guy named Farley. They'd often hang out and play music together. Farley said, "Elvis was always so eager to learn and try new things. He was a natural." Elvis started dating a girl named Billy. They were very close, and she often talked about how sweet and caring he was. She said, "Elvis was a great kisser, and he always made me feel special." They had a lot of fun together, but things didn't always go smoothly. Sometimes they'd argue, but they always made up. Elvis's dad, Vernon, was a bit strict, but he loved his son deeply. He wanted Elvis to do well and be successful. Vernon would often say, "Son, wouldn't you rather do something you love?" Elvis took those words to heart and worked hard to follow his dreams. When Elvis started recording at Sun Studio, things really started to happen. Sam Phillips, the owner, saw something special in him. He said, "Elvis was the most gorgeous voice I had ever heard." Elvis was nervous at first, but he soon found his groove. He recorded songs like "That's All Right" and "Blue Moon of Kentucky," which became big hits. Elvis's rise to fame was quick, and it changed his life forever. He went from being a simple kid from Tupelo to a national sensation, but deep down he was still the same Elvis. He never forgot where he came from, and always remembered the people who supported him. One of his closest friends was a girl named Regis. She went to the same school as Elvis and knew him well. She said Elvis was a very simple, sweet person. He had a great sense of humor and always made people laugh. They often hung out and talked about their dreams. Regis said, "I always felt like I was his confidant. He trusted me with his thoughts and feelings." Elvis's journey from a small town in Mississippi to becoming the king of rock and roll is a story of hard work, determination, and a bit of luck. He faced many challenges, but he never gave up. He always believed in himself and in his music. And that's what made him unique and beloved by so many. I believe in second chances, and I believe this young man deserves one. He has a family that loves him and a chance to make things right. I hope you will consider my request and grant him a pardon. I remember the first time I saw Elvis. It was at a church youth group. I was practically a baby in comparison to him, but I knew right away there was something special about him. My parents adored him, and I could understand why. He had this charm that could melt anyone's heart. We knew almost immediately that something was different about Elvis. He had a way of talking that was almost like a baby talk, but it was endearing. Elvis and I became close fast. He would joke around saying things like, "Oh, I just do that," when he did something amazing. It was serious right away, and we knew that what we had was meant to be. I got out of school and he came out of tech, but our connection was strong. If it was okay with his parents, we would hang out. Sometimes I would help wire the church for sound, and I remember how high I was up in the church. My mom told us several times that we were too young, but I couldn't help but feel drawn to him. Elvis would tell me about his early days, like when he said, "You had to keep your mind on the music, not on the crowd." He had a way of making everything sound so casual, even when it was anything but. I remember when he said, "Man, that's Sonafabich," about a particularly tough show. He and I were real close, and I always felt like I could talk to him about anything. Sam Phillips, the guy who discovered Elvis, once said, "He sang it well, but there is not a sound like that in the world." Sam was always encouraging, telling Elvis, "You're doing just fine." If you made a mistake, Sam would say, "It's okay, just keep going." I remember the first time I saw Elvis perform. He was just a lot of hair and energy, and I was totally stunned. It was almost like a dream. Charlie Fisher, one of Elvis's friends, said, "My wife, Steve, would be surprised if she knew how much time I spent with Elvis. I understood that feeling." My daughter, Dixie, dated him, and it was a big deal. Bob Neal, who managed Elvis for a while, said, "When Elvis came on, the crowd went wild, but still he made mistakes. I was like, good grief, but I was always there to support him. I said, I want him to sing, and he did." After his records got so popular, everything changed. The electric effect he had on people was incredible. Scotty Moore, who played guitar with Elvis, said, "Elvis just boomed," and it was true. Bob Neal had some problems managing him, but Elvis always wanted to be the best. He would ask, "Do you think I can make it?" And Bob would say he wanted to be a star just like one of our kids. When Elvis started along, people were in shock. Scotty Moore said it was earth-shattering. Tillman Franks, who worked with Elvis, said, "Mr. Franks, the record has skyrocketed up the charts." I remember when Frank Page, a DJ, said, "Elvis looked like he was about to leap off the stage. But he didn't get much of a hand at first." He said, "Ginny, they booed me off the stage." The acts they'd come to know didn't react well at first. Scotty Moore said, on the second appearance, they were still skeptical. Jeanette Hicks, a fan, said, "Those eyes," and Betty Umos, another fan, said, "Elvis said, 'Betty, quick, come over here.'" The crowd absolutely thrashed, and Betty said, "I was very fond of Elvis." Jim Ed Brown, a country singer, said, "There was a piano, and Elvis played it like no one else." Dixie Locke, my friend, said, "I felt I was not a part of it, but before long, girls were swarming around him." Horace Logan, who worked on the Louisiana Hayride, said, "After 19 years, everything did change." Billy Smith, Elvis's cousin, said, 14 or 16 will get you 20. And Lamar Fike, one of his friends, said, "I sometimes drove him around." Maxine Brown, a singer, said, "Everybody knew Elvis was a big deal, but there were also some funny moments." Maxine said, "The rubber busted, and Elvis had a rule, never break a virgin." One time, Elvis sent a telegram to his parents that said, "Hi, babies." When we started touring, Maxine said, "I'm not sure how it all began." But Dixie Locke said, "Elvis, don't you have any drawers?" Maxine laughed, saying, "Honey, God, he was huge." I remember when Betty Amos said, "I said to him one time, 'You need to be kissed.' Elvis was always full of surprises." Maxine said, "He was crazy about her," and Betty said, "He couldn't get enough. Before morning, they were always up to something." On the road, Jim Ed Brown said, "One night, Elvis was like a kid with 6 pair of feet." Maxine said, "Elvis Presley was a highly sexed young guy." And Bill Randall, a radio DJ, said, "Cute little thing," about one of Elvis's early performances. Carolyn Bradshaw, a fan, said, "When you come to a show, you never know what you'll see." Nita Lynn, another fan, said, "He was little, but he had a big presence." Louise Alley, a friend, said, "She really liked him," and Nita said, "You will never guess what happened." It was a wild time, and all of his romances were short. Frank Page said, after a few times they would move on. Ginny Wright, a fan, said, "She was very sharp and spunky." And Tom Bearden, a friend, said, "She was a beautiful young lady." Shirley Dia, a fan, said, "Anybody who's ever claimed to be with Elvis, I'm not sure." Horace Logan said, "You're bound to remember me, Mr. Logan," and it was true. Everyone had a story. Oscar Davis, a friend, said, "Bob, this guy is incredible." Charlie Lamb, who worked with Elvis, said, "It was really Oscar who found Elvis." DJ Fontana, the drummer, said, "We would see him walking around, and he was a razzle-dazzle character." Eddie Arnold, a country singer, said, "I was just a poor, hungry guy," and Elvis understood that feeling. David Wilds, who worked with Elvis, said, "When Tom was driving, Elvis would talk nonstop." Roy Orbison, a famous singer, said, "His energy was like a force of nature." Anita Carter, a country singer, said, "We went out there, and Elvis was so excited." Red West, one of Elvis's friends, said, "I was so afraid of what might happen." Barbara Hearn, a friend, said, "It was kind of a mutual thing." Dixie Locke said, "He felt like he was healthier than a herd of cattle." June Carter Cash, a famous country singer, said, "Elvis got a crush on me, and I kept praying it would go away." John Carter Cash, her son, said, "To rest, Elvis would sometimes just sit and talk." Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, said, "Hank Snow could follow anybody, but Elvis was different." Charlie Louvin, a country singer, said, "The Colonel sent us to get Elvis ready for a show." Elvis would say, "Girls, I'll see you all backstage." And me, Boren Axton, a songwriter, said, "I heard all this screaming." Jackie Rowland, a fan, said, "I'm sure I must have looked like a giant blueberry." Marty Robbins, a country singer, said, "They really mobbed him. When we went out on the beach, it was chaos." Me, Boren Axton, said, "He had a quick, sensual smile. And when she came back, she said, 'I couldn't believe what I saw.'" Kay Wheeler, a fan, said, "Here we were, and he was just so amazing." Martha Ann Barhanovich Eberman, a friend, said, "Daddy was booking all these people, and the teenagers just love him. Salvador Penu Taranto, a fan, said, "It was so different." June Juanico, a fan, said, "My first thought was, he's the most gorgeous thing I've ever seen." She said, "Come on, Glenda, let's go see him," when she asked, "Where are you going?" I said, "Biloxi is such a small town, but I have to go back." The room was a mess, and I said, "Where did you learn to kiss?" He had soft, full lips, and I said, "Oh my God." He asked, "Do you have to go in?" And I said, "I wasn't sure." He said, "By the way, I can't explain it." I said, "I wasn't sure either." Wanda Jackson, a country singer, said, "I was the first one to kiss him, and he was getting popular real fast." Tura Satana, an actress, said, "I had so much fun with him." She said, "Someday I'm gonna fly." And it was true. She said, "For tempting those boys into raping me." And it was a wild time. She said, "We had leather motorcycle jackets, and when I was dancing, I felt like I was in a movie." Scotty Moore said, "He was on and you could feel it." Jimmy Rogers Snow, a friend, said, "I had 2 motorcycles and we were about the same age." Grover Lewis, a writer, said, "That sizzling, sultry look was all Elvis. It was a time of wild energy and endless possibilities." I remember the days when Elvis Presley was just starting to make waves, and I was right there, witnessing it all. It was 1956, and the world was about to change forever. I was just a teenager, and Elvis was this mysterious, magnetic figure who appeared out of nowhere, making everyone jump around and scream. Chet Atkins, the famous guitarist, once told me that when Elvis first started performing, the crowd would go wild. He just had this energy that made people lose control. Chet said, "I could see it too." Elvis wasn't just singing. He was living every moment on stage. His performances were more than music. They were a kind of magic. Anne Fulcino, who knew Elvis well, told me that his attitude was always positive, even when things got tough. He never gave up, she said. He believed in himself, and that's what made him so special. One of the most striking things about Elvis was how scared he could be. Peter Guralnick and Ernst Jorgensen wrote in their book, Elvis Day by Day, that Elvis once said, "It scares me the way people react." But even though he was scared, he never showed it. He just kept going, even when the pressure was intense. Chick Crumpacker, who worked with Elvis, told me that they went back to Memphis after a show, and Elvis was already talking about his next big thing. He was always thinking ahead. Chick said, he had this drive that was unstoppable. Elvis's ambition was clear from the start. In a memo to Hal Wallis, Joe Hazen wrote, Elvis's meteoric rise is something to behold. His ambition is sky high. Elvis himself wrote to Hal Wallis, "My ambition is to be the best I can be, and I know I can do it." Barbara Hearn, who knew Elvis from his early days, shared some touching memories. "I remember when I first met Elvis," she said. "He was so personable and kind. He would drive up to our house and we'd chat. It was so huge for a small-town girl like me." Barbara also told me about a time when Elvis's mom, Gladys, came to visit. "She was a great old lady," Barbara said. "She was always neat and tidy, and I would telephone her often. She was serious and concerned about Elvis, but she always had a warm heart." Elvis's early fans were just as passionate as he was. Kay Wheeler, who grew up with Elvis in Memphis, had some stories that made me laugh and cringe. "He pretty much groped me once," Kay said, "but I was on the same page with him. It was just part of the excitement." Kay also remembered when Elvis asked her, "Where did you learn how to do that?" after she showed him some dance moves. "He couldn't get out of the auditorium," she said, "because the crowd was so wild." Nancy Kozakowski, another early fan, shared her memories of Elvis in Vegas. "He would sing directly to me," she said. "It was scary but also thrilling. He was always nice and flirty, and it made me feel special." Judy Spreckles, who was close to Elvis, had a different perspective. "How could you not know he was special?" she said. "He was so charismatic, and he treated everyone with respect." Gloria Paul, who wrote a book about her experiences with Elvis, recalled a time when she asked him, "Where did you learn how to do that?" Elvis just smiled and said, "I don't know. It just comes naturally." Joan Adams Shufy, who knew Elvis from his early days, remembered a time when he went back to his roots. "He was always the same person, no matter how famous he became," she said. He never forgot where he came from. The criticism of Elvis was harsh, especially from the older generation. Hedda Hopper, a famous columnist, wrote, "I applaud parents who keep their kids away from this sexual self-gratification on stage. But Elvis didn't let it get to him. He just kept doing what he loved." June Juanico, Elvis's cousin, had some intimate stories to share. "We spent so much time together," she said. "He was like a brother to me. We'd hug and he'd always be there for me." Steve Allen, who interviewed Elvis on his show, had a different take. "He was a piece of good luck," Steve said. "He worked to our advantage, and the audience loved him." Elvis's early fans, like Barbara Hearn, remembered him fondly. "He was very awkward in that era," she said, "but he was always trying to do his best." The early days of Elvis's fame were full of ups and downs, but one thing was clear. He was a force to be reckoned with. His fans were loyal, and his performances were unforgettable. Even when the critics were harsh, Elvis never lost his spirit. He just kept shining, and that's what made him the king. I remember the night I told Nick, "No, Nick." It was one of those moments when I knew I had to set boundaries. Nick was always around, always trying to get close to Elvis. Sometimes it felt like he was always up to something, always trying to get into Elvis's space. But Elvis didn't always invite the people Nick wanted him to. I remember one time, Elvis didn't invite Natalie Wood to a gathering, even though her parents called and asked if she could be a house guest. Natalie told Albert Goldman that her parents had received the call, but Elvis's parents were the ones who made the request. It was a bit confusing, but I guess Elvis had his reasons. Elvis felt sorry for Nick sometimes. Nick would sit around watching Elvis, hoping for some attention. I remember one time after a show, Barbara Pittman said, "A lot of people just sat on their hands." It was a bit sad, but sometimes that's how it was. Nick was always around, and sometimes it was a bit much. Philip Barber told me about the time he met Elvis. He said, "They were very congenial to me." He was so giddy around Elvis, and I could see why. It was hard not to be. Natalie Wood, who was a bit older and more experienced, said, "I hadn't been around anything like that before." She was impressed, but a bit overwhelmed. Barbara Hearn, who knew Elvis well, said, "Elvis was always kissing everyone. It was part of his charm, but sometimes it could be a bit much." She told me about the time she was with Elvis and his parents. "Man, Gladys was stoned," she said. It was a different time, and things were a bit wild. Susan Bancroft, who was around Elvis a lot, said, "We just sang. It was simple and fun, but there were always stories." Lillian Smith Fortenberry, who knew Elvis's family, said, "She didn't like the men. It was a bit of a complicated relationship, but that's what families are like." When I talked to Barbara Hearn, she mentioned a new girlfriend Elvis had. "She looked like a rat," Michael Zimring said. It was a harsh comment, but sometimes people can be cruel. Elvis himself had some strong reactions to people. Byron Raphael quoted Elvis as saying, "Heaven help us," when he saw someone he didn't like. Marilyn Evans Knowles Reel, who met Elvis, said, "Wow, he's beautiful." And there was Elvis, just as everyone had heard. Dottie Harmony, who knew him from early on, said, "He was always there, and there was Elvis." Hal Cantor, who worked with Elvis on some of his early films, said, "It looked like an elephant." He was talking about one of Elvis's outfits, which was a bit over the top, but it was part of his style. Hal Wallis, who produced some of Elvis's films, said, "I want you." It was a big deal for Elvis to be in Hollywood. When I talked to Kay Wheeler, she told me about the time she saw Elvis. He sat on their hands, she said. It was a bit of a disappointment, but sometimes that's how it goes. She also mentioned the Kelly green sport coat, which was a bit of a mystery. It seemed lost, but in 2009, a swatch of it turned up on eBay. The Colonel had allowed it to be cut up, and RCA offered the remnants as promotional pieces. When I talked to Frank Page, he told me about the time Elvis performed. There were nearly 10,000 of them, he said. The noise was so loud, it could have peeled paint. Barbara Hearn said, "I'd wonder why he did certain things, but she never knew. She just knew that Elvis was a bit different." June Juanico, who knew Elvis well, said, "He said I had the worst voice. It was a bit harsh, but it was part of his personality." She also mentioned the time he did "Love Me Tender." It was a special moment, and she remembered it clearly. Francis Forbes, who knew Elvis, said, "He didn't pay any attention. But when he was in a room, he was fascinated with everything around him." Gloria Mole, who knew him, said, "When you were in that room, you felt his energy. Elvis's hair was always a topic." In some of his later movies, he backed off the hard black dye for a warmer brown. In Kid Galahad, you could see a hint of his natural hair, which was going gray. Tony Curtis, who worked with Elvis, said, "On lunch hour, we'd talk about everything. It was a different time, and Elvis was a different person." Barbara Hearn mentioned a time when Elvis's parents were around. "Barbara's nose," she said, referring to a comment Elvis made. She also talked about Dolores Hart, who said, "I couldn't take myself away from him." Dolores Hart, who later became a nun, remembered Elvis as a charming, simple young boy. She said, "I couldn't take myself away from him." Elizabeth Scott, who knew Elvis, said, "You couldn't have a better person." She was impressed by his kindness and charm. She also mentioned a time when she saw him in a bright gold gown. "He was always so different," she said. "When I talked to Tura Satana, she told me about the time she met Elvis. He was always so kind," she said. She remembered the girls from the show, and how they all felt about him. "He was the star, and we were all just there to support him," she said. Elvis's time in the army was a bit different. Tempest Storm, who knew him, said, "He called me about 3 one morning. It was a bit of a surprise, but that's how Elvis was. He would call people at all hours." Elvis wrote a telegram to Private Herschel Nixon, saying, "I got a lucky break in life, and I am very thankful for it." It was a touching moment, and it showed how much he cared. Yvonne Lime, who knew Elvis, wrote in her diary, "Honey, I miss you so much." It was a heartfelt message, and it showed how much he meant to people. Sam Phillips, who discovered Elvis, said, "Elvis came out with a rash. It was a bit of a health issue, but it was part of his life." Reverend James Hamill, who knew Elvis, said, "He said, 'Pastor, I need your help.' It was a moment of vulnerability, and it showed how much Elvis needed support. When I talked to Kay Wheeler, she said, the change had set him back. It was a tough time for Elvis, but he always tried to move forward. Gloria Paul, who knew him well, said, "He watched me. It was a bit intense, but that's how he was." Elvis was always a bit of a mystery, but he was also a kind and caring person. When I talked to Byron Raphael, he said, "Your wife sure is a sweet one, Byron." It was a simple comment, but it showed how much Elvis cared about people. Lamar Fike, who was part of Elvis's inner circle, said, "One day I just put an LP on." It was a simple moment, but it was part of their friendship. He also mentioned a time when Elvis was upset. "It really, really upset him," Lamar said. It was a tough moment, but Elvis always tried to stay positive. When I talked to Anita Wood, she said, "He was effervescent." She remembered the time he invited her to come up. I said, "Sure," she said. It was a special moment, and she remembered it clearly. She also mentioned the time he said, "Lamar, look at her." It was a bit of a joke, but it was part of their relationship. Anita Wood also talked about the things that went on in California. It was a different time, she said. She mentioned a time when she went out shopping with Elvis. He was always so generous, she said. She also talked about a time when he called her. "But really and truly, he was always there for me," she said. When I talked to Lamar Fike, he said, "One time Anita went out shopping. It was a bit of a surprise, but that's how it was." When I talked to Marty Lacker, he said, "They were all available. It was a different time, and things were a bit wild." Elvis's time in the army was a bit of a challenge. Jimmy Rogers Snow, who knew him, said, "I just remember him wearing a chartreuse jacket. It was a bit of a wild choice, but that's how Elvis was." He also mentioned a time when Elvis said, "I can't see myself doing this." It was a tough moment, but Elvis always tried to stay positive. When I talked to Billy Smith, he said, the biggest majority of the time he was happy. But there were tough moments, and Elvis had to deal with them. Major Albert Turner, who knew Elvis, said, "Congratulations," when Elvis joined the army. It was a big moment for Elvis, and it showed how much he was respected. When I talked to Anita Wood, she said, "My heart was being torn away. It was a tough time, but Elvis always tried to stay positive." She also mentioned a time when he said, Let us see him." It was a special moment, and it showed how much he cared. Elvis's time in the army was a bit of a challenge, but he always tried to stay positive. When I talked to Eddie Faddle, he said he would come over and we'd talk. It was a special time, and it showed how much Elvis cared about his friends. I remember the days when Elvis was stationed at Fort Hood. Eddie Faddle once told me he put his foot down when it came to his duties. It was clear that Elvis took his role in the army seriously. Janice Faddle, Eddie's wife, shared that her father knew all the doctors and that Elvis would often go to them for advice or help. It was a time of growth for him, both personally and professionally. Elvis loved recording, and he once said, "I wish they'd let me pick it." It was evident that he cared deeply about the music he made. Anita Wood, his girlfriend at the time, recalled, "It was the greatest time of my life." She often talked about how Elvis would joke around, saying, "Simple, I'm kinda proud of it," when they laughed together. The hot Texas summer was something they both remembered fondly, with Anita saying, "It was in the hot summertime." The army was tough on Elvis, and his friends noticed. Lamar Fike, one of his closest friends, told me, "He's working us to death." Despite the challenges, Elvis found some solace in his duties. Rex Mansfield, another friend, said he loved the army. Even when things got tough, Elvis kept his spirits up. Lamar remembered a moment when Elvis looked at a girl and said, "She didn't want to go," with a hint of sadness in his voice. Elvis's friends and family were always there for him. Dottie Ayers, a close friend, shared, "We were in the room talking, and you could see how much he missed home." Billy Smith, Elvis's cousin, said, "Mama, I don't think Elvis is doing well." The stress of being away from home was taking a toll on him. Lamar Fike recalled, "They drained him, but he kept going. There were moments of levity, too." Anita Wood shared a hilarious story about a time when Elvis shouted, "Little, little, little," during a playful moment. But there were also times when Elvis was deeply affected. Dixie Locke, a former girlfriend, remembered, he reacted so strongly when he heard about his mother's illness. Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, was often seen trying to control the chaos around him, shouting, "Get all of these people out of here," when things got too overwhelming. Elvis's heart was always with his mother. Harold Lloyd, a friend, remembered, "Please don't take my baby away," as one of Elvis's last requests. When the funeral director, Freddie Bienstock, talked about the funeral, he said, "I've never seen anything like it." J.D. Sumner, a gospel singer, recalled, "He put his arms around me and I could feel his pain." James Blackwood, another close friend, remembered Elvis saying, "Mama, I would give every dime I have to bring her back." The days after his mother's passing were tough. Barbara Pittman, a friend, said, "They were holding him back, but he was in a trance." Lillian Smith Fortenberry, a family friend, remembered, "He can't go, not now." Arlene Coggan, a neighbor, recalled, "He walked around like a lost soul, and people were screaming, trying to get his attention." Despite the pain, Elvis found moments of joy. Eddie Faddle shared how Elvis loves the snow during a visit to Germany. In a rare interview, Elvis talked about his feelings, saying, "I can't go, not without her." His friends and family supported him through it all, and he never forgot their kindness. When Elvis was in Germany, he was a different person. Look magazine described him as the rock and roll matador, and he often said, "I'm just a plain soldier." Frank Glankler, a friend, remembered, "When we finally found the house, he was relieved." Charlie Hodge, another friend, recalled, "I could hear Elvis singing in the distance, and it brought a smile to my face." Elvis's time in the army changed him, but it also brought him new friendships and experiences. Red West, a friend, said, "He didn't like it, but he made the best of it." Lamar Fike remembered, "He looked like a different man, but he was still our Elvis." The weird hours and the constant attention were challenging, but Elvis found ways to cope. Anita Wood shared, "In 100 years, I won't forget the time we spent together." Elvis's letters to his friends and family were filled with emotion. In a letter to Anita Wood, he wrote, "I have been dating, but nothing serious." Margit Buogen, a fan, described him as shy and different. Red West recalled, "She went and got herself all worked up over him." Lamar Fike said, "Elvis dated her, but it was complicated." Elizabeth Mansfield, a friend, shared, "I assure you, he was the man I adored." She remembered the ups and downs of their relationship, saying, "There would be at least a couple of girls each week." Joe Esposito, a close friend, said, "Everything was yes, ma'am, when it came to the ladies." Elizabeth Mansfield remembered, "He was hurt, but he tried to hide it." Elvis's time in Germany was a mix of joy and pain. Lamar Fike recalled, "Boy, she stalked him like prize game." Elizabeth Mansfield described the attention he received, saying, "All the GI wanted a piece of him." Despite the challenges, Elvis found moments of happiness. Rex Mansfield remembered, "We hit it off and he was a great friend." Elvis's friends and family were always there for him, even when things got tough. Lamar Fike said, "He just let loose sexually, and it was a different side of him." George Klein, a close friend, remembered, "Who in the hell could keep up with him?" Jane Wilbanks, a fan, shared her memories of dating Elvis in Germany, saying, "It was kind of Cinderella-ish." She remembered, "He was sad and cried a lot, and I didn't know what to say." Elvis's time in the Army was a defining period in his life. He faced challenges, but he also found love and friendship. His friends and family supported him through it all, and he never forgot the people who were there for him. Lamar Fike summed it up, saying, "Elvis was after her all right." Dave Marsh, a music critic, described Elvis's time in Germany as the answer to a question. Anita Wood recalled, "I have hated Dee ever since then," referring to a difficult moment in their relationship. Despite the ups and downs, Elvis's time in the Army shaped him into the man he became. His friends and family were always there, and he never forgot the lessons he learned. Lamar Fike remembered, "Chinese Coolie," a nickname they used to joke around. Rex Mansfield described the girls Elvis dated, saying, "Going in and out," but it was clear that Elvis was a different person after his time in Germany. Elvis's life was a mix of joy and pain, but he always found a way to keep going. His friends and family were his support system, and he never forgot the people who were there for him. Lamar Fike recalled, "In Germany, he was a different man, but he was still our Elvis. Elvis and I met when I was just a young girl. I remember the first time he came to see my father. My father was very strict, but he had a soft spot for Elvis. He was always talking about how Elvis was a great guy, a fun guy. I didn't really know what to think of him at first, but when I saw him, everything changed. He looked at me, and I felt this unbelievable feeling. It was like a pull, a connection that I couldn't ignore. He was so beautiful, and I couldn't help but feel drawn to him. I remember thinking, it's amazing to me how he can make me feel this way just by looking at me. We started spending more time together. Sometimes it was just the two of us, and other times it was with his friends. One of his friends, Curry, told me later that Elvis would often talk about me. He said, she's a beautiful girl, and he just couldn't get her out of his mind. Things got more serious between us. I remember one time we were alone, and he leaned over to kiss me. It was like kissing a table, Curry said later, but for me it was different. It was a moment I'll never forget. We swore undying fidelity to each other. I felt more comfortable with him than I ever had with anyone else, but it wasn't all easy. There were times when I was terrified. I remember thinking, I don't think he was prepared for this. We were young and it was all so new. We were leading two lives. One where we were just friends, and another where we were secretly in love. Elvis had a past too. He had a girlfriend before me, Anita. She was a known entity, and I always felt a bit of competition with her. But Elvis always assured me that I was the one he wanted. He would say, "You think my father would let me date a girl he didn't approve of?" It made me feel special, like I was the only one for him. When Elvis had to go to the army, it was a very difficult parting. I remember him saying, "Now, gentlemen, I'll be back and I'll be better than ever." He was always so confident, and it made me believe in him. During his time in the army, he would write me letters. He called me Little One, and I would wait for his letters every day. They were my lifeline. When he came back, everything changed again. He was different, more mature. He had this new energy, and it was like he was a different person. He would say, "I want to ask you something," and I knew what he was going to ask. We were in love, and I was ready to be with him. But it wasn't just us. Elvis had a lot of other people around him, his friends, his fans, and even other women. I remember one time he was with a girl named Juliet, and she said, "He has a wonderful sense of humor, but it was hard to see him with other people." I always wondered, is he really in love with me? Despite everything, I knew I was in love with him. I was in a dream world, and I didn't want to wake up. We had our moments and we had our struggles, but through it all, I knew he was the one for me. Elvis was a complex person. He had many lives. He was a superstar, but he was also just a man. He had his good days and his bad days. But no matter what, he always had a way of making me feel special, and for that I will always be grateful. As I reflect on the stories and memories of Elvis, it's clear that his life was a complex mix of fame, love, and personal struggles. I remember talking to Billy Smith, who told me, naturally he did it again, about some of Elvis's recurring behaviors. Marty Lacker shared a funny moment, saying, "Believe it or not," and Patty Perry reminded me, "Listen, you gotta realize," about how Elvis could be spontaneous and intense. Joe Esposito once told me about a time when she fell right over, referring to someone who was overwhelmed by Elvis's presence. Lamar Fike shared a profound insight. Elvis had no parameters, highlighting his free spirit. I also learned from Joe and Elena Amano's book, Good Rockin' Tonight, how Elvis dressed in his style choices. Laurel Goodwin, in a magazine article, mentioned that Elvis did not like this film, and in a letter to Randy Erdman, she wrote about the protective big brother-like bond she had with Elvis. Stella Stevens, in an interview, recalled, "I was looking, and I was thought of as the bad girl," but she also shared lighter moments like hanging out with Elvis. Elvis's relationship with Priscilla was intense and emotional. Priscilla, in her book with Sandra Harmon, Elvis and Me, described the two torturous years and the moments when Elvis wanted something. Joe Esposito and others often commented on how close they were, but there were also difficult times. Priscilla remembered the exact words Elvis used, like "there she is," and "let me look at you," which showed his deep affection. However, there were also moments of tension, and Priscilla had to make tough choices. Anita Wood, in her interviews, shared her experiences with Elvis, including the time she heard him say, "I heard what you just said," and the intense emotions that followed. She also remembered how Elvis became very upset, and how she felt about leaving, saying, "You can't keep me from going." These moments highlight the complexity of their relationship. Elvis's relationships with other women, like Yvonne Craig and Anne Margaret, were also significant. Yvonne, in her interviews, talked about the unique bond she had with Elvis, the deep carpeting in his apartment, and the times they spent together. Anne Margaret, in her book, recalled the first time she met Elvis and the impact he had on her life. Joe Esposito and others often commented on how strong their relationship was and how it affected Priscilla. Throughout these stories, it's clear that Elvis was a man of many facets. He could be charming, caring, and protective, but also intense and unpredictable. His relationships with women were often passionate, but they also brought him a lot of personal challenges. Despite the fame and adoration, Elvis was a human being with his own struggles and vulnerabilities. In the end, the memories of those who knew him best paint a picture of a man who was deeply loved, but also deeply misunderstood. Elvis's life was a roller coaster of highs and lows, and his legacy continues to inspire and fascinate people around the world.